Okay, I think you're live.
You can see my screen okay, Dottie?
Yep, all good.
Perfect. Well, welcome everybody. I see some of you have joined us. I appreciate you spending some of your afternoon with me talking about one of my favorite places and one of my favorite birding destinations, specifically Paraguay, which is obviously a lesser known destination. So some of you might not know anything about it, which would be exciting. So I'm excited to tell you about it and show you some of the pictures and describe the birding destinations that we visited when we went down there as Atlanta Audubon a couple years ago. So I will go ahead and get started. I do see one of my friends, Gus Kaufman, is on here, and Gus was on me with me on this trip. So I'm excited that he's here and he can chime in if I start telling any lies about our trip. But again, welcome. My name is Adam Betuel. I am the Conservation Director for Atlanta Audubon, and today we're going to talk about birding in Paraguay and through the lens of our trip that we led down there back in 2017. I personally was supposed to be in Paraguay again this July, but obviously that has been postponed, and so who knows when I'll be able to get back down there again. All right, so to get started, like I kind of mentioned, some of you probably don't know much about Paraguay. Here's a map of South America, and Paraguay is one of the few landlocked countries, and again, it's kind of off the beaten path, maybe so much so that you don't realize that my arrow is actually pointing at Bolivia. Paraguay is this country over here. Like I said, it's one of the few landlocked countries of South America, but it is an amazing place with a diversity of habitats and interesting history, and lots of reasons that you should consider going there in the future. So here's kind of a zoomed in look of Paraguay. It's just a teeny bit smaller than the state of California. So it's decent sized, you know, I mean, nothing near the size of the US, of course, but it's a pretty big place. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the habitat types you can find in Paraguay, but there is kind of a strong distinction with the eastern half of the country and the western half to the left there, going up from Argentina and bordering Bolivia. But I think it's helpful when you're thinking about Paraguay. Why don't you know anything about it? Why maybe have you not visited, or why aren't there many bird watchers in Paraguay, even though that is rapidly changing? But I'm going to touch on a few historical moments that kind of shape Paraguay and maybe shape visitation to the country. This guy here is Francisco Solano Lopez, and he was the president of Paraguay back in the mid 1800s. He succeeded after his father. And, you know, at that time, Paraguay had a pretty robust economy. They were doing great things, but they did have a bit of a protectionist or an insular economy and trade preferences. And despite the economic success, this guy, President Lopez, led Paraguay into what became the Paraguayan War, or the War of the Triple Alliance. And what happened here is, after an uprising in Uruguay, where Paraguay had some support there, a conflict between Brazil and Paraguay broke out. And unfortunately for Paraguay, and under the leadership again of this President Lopez, it turned into this Triple Alliance War. And so Paraguay ended up having a war against Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay all at the same time. And unsurprisingly, that did not go well for Paraguay. You can see how it lost a chunk of its territory. So the light gray areas that are surrounded by the dotted red, those were, you know, parts of the country that went to Argentina and Brazil. They did get some more territory from a later war with Bolivia up there in the Gran Chaco, which you can see. But Paraguay lost a lot of its power, its economic status, its actual physical landmass during this war, and it had a huge toll on the population. It's estimated that around 60% of Paraguay died during this conflict, and that 90% of all the men of the country. So it was devastating to Paraguay for many reasons, and it definitely set it back in the shadow of Brazil and Argentina, and a place that was no longer thriving and welcoming of visitors. Fast forward, you know, about 100 years, not quite, and maybe if you know much about Paraguay, it could be this guy. This is Alfredo Stroessner. Now, Stroessner was a dictator of Paraguay. He ran from 1954 to 1989 before he was ousted in a coup. But Stroessner is the longest running dictatorship, or he had the longest dictatorship in the history of South America. You know, he was an anti-communist, actually was aligned to the US on many things during that time. but he really stifled Paraguay and made it a place that most people didn't want to go. But he's been out of office now for over 30 years, and in that time, Paraguay has rebounded greatly. It has a lot more visitors coming, a lot more bird watchers, which we're going to talk more about. And it's a very safe and culturally traditional country, and definitely worth your time. Now that it's safe, why aren't the birders going there as much, or why is it kind of taking some time to get people excited about bird watching in Paraguay? And if you're a real serious world birding lister and you're chasing down those endemic bird species, Paraguay has one, the Chaco nothura. And actually, as of recently, Paraguay has 0. The only endemic bird, so the only bird that was found solely in Paraguay, has now been deemed only a subspecies of the spotted nothura. So it's a type of tinamou, a little chicken-like bird. So Paraguay, for all its benefits, it has no endemic species, but it does have a lot of birds, while found in other countries, are much easier to see in Paraguay. So despite it having these setbacks, having this maybe rough history, and the lack of endemic birds, why would anyone want to go to Paraguay, and why did we go there back in 2017 for Atlanta Audubon? That's me in the upper left after my sophomore year in college. If you could see me right now, I have a pretty scraggly little beard and a lot more wrinkles. I was fortunate enough to spend the summer in Paraguay doing bird research with a local ornithologist. This is me and a couple of the park rangers at one of the national parks. There is no field guide to the birds of Paraguay. It is coming soon, hopefully next year. But I was there gathering some of this basic data, where birds are, what species are common, where can they be found. A lot of that baseline data just did not exist. So I had a personal relationship to Paraguay and to some of the bird people down there. And when we decided to go there, I had a level of comfort in taking a group there. Additionally, Paraguay was one of the locations that National Audubon selected as a country of importance in their International Alliances program. And Paraguay is a home to many of our migratory birds. A few songbirds do make it that far south, yellow-billed cuckoo, some of our thrushes, but many shorebirds, the yellowlegs and phalarope species, will overwinter as far south as Paraguay in some of their inland lagoons that they have. So it aligned with National Audubon Society and their initiatives. It was a place that I was comfortable with. Again, it has that tradition, that safety, and it just seemed like a fun place to go. And so that was more or less our rationale for taking a group to Paraguay, again, back in the summer of 2017. So here's our group. I mentioned Gus, he's the tall guy, a few in from the left there. I always joke every time I give any of these talks that I take a photo the first morning before people get tired or mad at me or are bummed out for missing a nice bird. So this is us ready to go on our very first morning. Trying to remember if our buddy Jamie Vittich there is on the right. He was not with us at the start of the trip, but joined us after the fact. So these were my fellow travelers who made this trip such a success. On the right there, we have one of our drivers, as well as the guy with the hat and his arms crossed. That's Paul Smith, who's one of the most expert birders down in Paraguay. He does a lot of research and leads a lot of birding travel down in the country. So here's our itinerary. Kind of in the center there, if you can see my mouse, you'll see a little bird icon with 0, 6, and 14. The numbers refer to the days of the trip. So this was about a 2-week trip. We started in Asunción, which is the capital, right there on the border with Argentina. And we headed northwest up through the Chaco. So 5 days up there, back to the capital, and then we did our eastern loop of the country and ended up hopping over to Argentina for a short bit. We did have some weather issues that caused us to change the second half of our trip, which I'll get into details later, but we were gonna go to Imbaracayú, which is a national park and forest up where days 9, 10, and 11 were supposed to take place, but we rebounded and found some similar habitat, and it all worked out spectacularly. So we went down to San Rafael and some other spots to the south. So I mentioned earlier, you can kind of split Paraguay into 2 halves. And the northern half, the northern 60%, is called the Chaco. It's part of this Gran Chaco ecotone or biome you can see there that runs into Bolivia and Argentina. And this area is in the rain shadow of the Andes. So if you think of the center of our country, it's much drier, grassier. Once you go a little bit further west, just on the east side of the Rockies, it's desert. And so here in Paraguay, you have that grassy, dry type habitat from the Andes Mountains, taking all that moisture from the weather systems that are passing by. So This area, again, 60% of the landmass and only 3% of the population of Paraguay. So it's sparsely populated, lots of large ranches and estancias, some agriculture, and then just, you know, open green space. So what does the Chaco look like? You can kind of divide it into 3 different biomes. As you head further north and northwest, it gets drier and drier and drier. So right outside of Asunción, once you cross the Paraguay River, there's just lots of vast palm savannas, as you can see here. Just as far as you can see, nothing but palm trees and grasses. You get a little bit further north, you encounter these saline inland lagoons. They're ephemeral, that dry up. Some of the vegetation here is very interesting. It's reminiscent of what you'd find on the coast. So it's a very unique part of the country and part of the world. Then you enter the really dry, scrubby, dusty, thorny type habitats of the dry Chaco, maybe similar to parts of the Southwest United States or South Texas. And all these areas, of course, are going to have different bird opportunities, which we took advantage of. So through this area, there's one maiden road. It's the Trans-Chaco Highway, and it is, you know, straight as an arrow and not much going on, and it can be quite of a long drive to get up to some of the exciting birds. This is what we were on for hours on our first big travel day. And this is the most common sight. There are lots of large trucks using this area, and not much, you know, commuter traffic. And the road looks great until you get a couple 100 miles away from Asunción, and then the road is horrible, to be quite frank. It's remote. There's even some discussion that some of the truckers like the road to be rough because it elongates their travel, and they can charge more for moving goods from Bolivia and other parts of the country. So it's not a great road once you get pretty far north. It's broken asphalt, and the group was full of real troopers to deal with the bounciness here. But again, if you want to see some of these exciting birds, you have to put up with these rough roads. And kind of ironically, the road then turns to a dirt road and then eventually a sand road. And this is a much more pleasant drive than what I was just showing you. So this is the extent of where we went on the Trans-Chaco Highway, which again, the main road through the region, and it becomes a dirt road after a while. So starting back in the humid Chaco, where it's palm savannas and wetlands, this is kind of a common scene, a little pocket wetland or open water surrounded by grass, agriculture, or herds of cattle and whatnot. So here we have maguaris, storks. You might recognize roseate spoonbills that we have down here in the coast of Georgia. They're down in Paraguay. Brazilian and ringed teal are the ducks that you're seeing there. So we had lots of ways to break up our drive, hop on the side of the road, and do some exciting birding. Scarlet-headed blackbird was one of the first birds that we had on our first morning once we got out of the capital and into the Chaco. A real stunning bird that we had fantastic looks at. The ringed kingfisher, this is like the larger cousin of our belted kingfisher, which runs throughout most of the neotropics. Buff-necked ibis is a really cool bird, kind of a large-headed ibis, chunkier than our white or glossy ibis we have here in the U.S. or in the eastern U.S. Yellow-headed caracara, we had this at our lunch stop. We stopped to get some famous empanadas, one of the best-known spots along the Trans-Chaco Highway, and this bird was hanging out while we were waiting for our food to be brought out to the table. This area is great for wading birds, and it has the Jabiru stork. This bird stands around 6 feet tall, so it's one of the larger birds on the planet. That jumbo-sized, jet black beak. We were able to see multiple of them, and even got lucky enough to see one taking down this gigantic fish from the side of the road. And you can see a Brazilian teal is the duck to the far left there. So this was a bird that I was thrilled to see the first time and excited to show people on this trip, and something that will always leave a memory for me. So that's kind of some of the species that you can expect in that lower, more southerly, wet part of the Chaco. We just drove through that area, stopping on our way up and our way back, but our first few nights we stayed at the Central Chaco Lagoons outside of the town of Philadelphia in Paraguay. And this area, as I mentioned, is full of ephemeral saline lakes. There are a lot of German Mennonites in this area, so this part of the country, it's actually somewhat odd to even hear Spanish being spoken. There's a lot of Guarani, which is the indigenous language that still persists in this part of the country. And you'll see a lot of very fair-skinned Europeans that live in the area and have been there for decades. And this is kind of that transition zone from the more wet area to the very, very dry. So this has little pockets of wetness and then more dry, scrubby habitat like you can see in this photo. So some of the birds we saw around here, white-fronted woodpecker, a really gorgeous bird. Golden-billed saltator, these were common birds. This is I believe a young bird or a female. The males are a bit more contrasty with the black and white on their face. But not too different from like the grosbeaks that we have here in the US. Aplomado falcon. You may know that these exist in very low numbers in South Texas, but are found throughout parts of the neotropics. This is a scimitar-billed wood creeper. In the US, we have the brown creeper. That's our only wood creeper. But once you get down into Latin America, there are tons and tons of different wood creeper species that you can find, some of which provide the hardest identification challenges out there. But this one's a real stunner with that oversized curved beak. Spot-backed puffbird. This is actually the Chaco puffbird. That's the Chaco subspecies. There's been some discussion about splitting this into its own species. But there are a handful of puffbird species in Paraguay and in this part of South America. The blue tufted starthroat, one of the more gorgeous hummingbirds that we had. This is the same individual. I was just lucky enough to catch it when it turned the right direction and show off that amazing gorget, the beautiful feathers they have there. And this area had a lot of flowering cacti. And so that hummingbird specifically was coming and just feasting on these cactus flowers, which was great to see. And it meant they were coming down just a couple feet off the ground, so we got some good looks. And even our first night in the Central Chaco at Laguna Capitan was the place we were staying. We had some tropical screech owls, ferruginous pygmy owls, and some other great birds just around the grounds of where we were staying. This area, we didn't get this until the following days, but Greater Rhea, the ostrich of the Americas. We found multiple flocks of these birds. I think we maybe had 5 or 10 at a time. This was the closest look we had at them. But you never get tired of seeing these giants running around the grasslands. And so we spent a few days in that Central Chaco visiting multiple lagoons, some more wetlands, some more dry habitat. But then we continued northwest, being closer and closer to Bolivia, further and further away from civilization, until we got to the Enciso National Park. Again, an obviously very remote location. I actually spent a month here during my first trip to Paraguay doing research. This is where that earlier photo was from. And again, dirt road, dry, scrubby, and very little traffic passing by on the dirt road. This is kind of what it looked like. And actually walking up and down the road often provided some great birding. We would come out first thing the 2 mornings we were there and look for various birds or mammals to cross over the road to see if we could find anything exciting, which we did. On the left there, this is kind of the entrance to the national park. They do have a few staff there, a main park ranger, a guard or 2, and some kitchen and cleaning staff. To the right there is where we stayed. And it's obviously a bit rough, but considering where we were, this place does have hot water, it does have air conditioning units and electricity. Everyone did have to tough it out a little bit, but considering where we were, this is about as nice as you can expect for being hours and hours and hours from a sizable town. So this is where we camped out for a couple days. And this is what the habitat and the trail system looks like. So this area is so dense with low vegetation, you pretty much have to stay on the trail. You can't really bushwhack at all. There are only a couple, large trees that stick out above the shorter vegetation. And so we walked the loop trail that's at Enciso a couple times. And like I mentioned, walked up and down the road when we were doing our birding. There are very limited pools or standing water in this part of the country, at least during the season we were there. We were there during our summer. This was an August trip, meaning it was their winter, even though up in the Chaco where we were, it probably still got close to 90 degrees. So not a traditional winter in this part of the country. Other parts of the country do occasionally get snow, and so it can get near freezing, but here it was hot. And this algae or vegetation covered little pond is a birding hotspot because again, there's no standing water nearby. So if someone's gonna come bathe or drink, this is a great spot to just wait patiently and hope something exciting shows up. I mentioned how thorny and dry and dense this area was. You can see what some of that vegetation looked like, the thorns there on the quebracho tree and some of the nests that the birds are using with really thorny branches. So it's not the most forgiving habitat, but it is beautiful and it has very unique and special birds if you're willing to go chase them. So this is the Piqui ground dove, a really common small dove, kind of smaller than our mourning dove, but bigger than our common ground dove that you'll get in the coastal plain. Pretty common species we would see. This is a Cinereus tyrant, a type of flycatcher. This is the female. The male is more of a dark slate gray, black type color all over. Zone-tailed hawk. I almost got a great photo here. It clipped off its wing. Zone-tailed hawks have pretty widespread distribution. But one thing that's really cool about these birds is they mimic vultures. They'll often go up in a kettle of vultures and they'll drift around, not flapping very often, very different than how many hawks soar. You can kind of see the under pattern of this bird is somewhat resembles a turkey vulture. So they will act like a vulture, and then when they see a prey item, they'll sneak attack on that bird. So we had a real close flyby of one of these zone-tailed hawks. Rufous-browed pepper shrike is another bird that has a wide distribution with a lot of subspecies and geographic variations in their plumage and in their calls and songs. We had multiple of these birds. During my first trip to Paraguay, we were doing some mist netting, and I caught one of these birds, and it pinched my hand pretty good. It's the only bird I've ever held in my hand that made me bleed, and you can kind of imagine from that little hooked beak on the front. And if you know of small songbirds with a hooked beak, you might think of vireos, because our vireos here in Georgia and the eastern U.S. have a little hook on the beak, a little tip, and this is in the vireo family, though it looks a little bit different. Lark-like brush runners. These are birds that nest in large family groups, have these big oversized nests, walk on the ground. We had lots of them in the northern parts of the Chaco during this trip. This is a rufous hornero. And hornero, the word comes from the Spanish root for oven. And you can see they kind of make these nests that look like a wood fire oven, kind of like our oven birds. Our oven birds don't use clay-like material. They use grasses and whatnot, but that side entrance is where the horneros get their name. And so it's a type of oven bird. Very common. Glittering bellied emerald might have been the next prettiest hummingbird, or right up there with the starthroat that I showed you earlier. This is a gorgeous male we had at Enciso. Masked gnatcatcher, very similar to our blue-gray gnatcatcher, just with that black mask. So that's a sampling of some of the birds we had in Enciso. So, at this point in the trip, we're racking up a pretty impressive species list. But if you're going to go to the Chaco, if you're going to go to remote Paraguay and deal with those bumpy roads, you're looking for the big six. And so there are 6 species that are endemic to the Chaco habitat, and that while they can be found in parts of Argentina or maybe barely in Bolivia, Paraguay is maybe the best spot to go look for all 6 of them. And we did pretty well. So one of the big 6 is the Chaco owl, similar to our barred owl in many ways. And of course, from our photo, you can tell we had success finding that bird relatively early on in the trip. Crested gallito, kind of hidden up there in the top right. It's a type of tapaculo. If you know any Spanish, tapaculo kind of means, cover your backside or cover your butt. And these birds are notoriously difficult to get good looks at. They like to skulk and stay hidden. We heard a lot of these birds, of the gallitos, but we had to put in a lot of work to get a good look. And this was about as good as we got. So took some work, but we were successful. Black-legged Seriema. This was from one of those early morning scans up the road. We later in the trip had red-legged Seriema, but this is the one that's up in this part of the country and a little bit more difficult. You may have seen a silly YouTube video of a Seriema in Brazil running on a golf course, picking up golf balls and slamming them into the ground or onto the cart path. If you haven't seen that, you might want to check it out, a bird throwing golf balls, but it was a red-legged Seriema, a close relative of this bird. Black-bodied woodpecker, a really difficult bird to find, very similar to our pileated. We put in a lot of work one afternoon to see this bird, and we're literally seconds away from calling it quits when this bird showed up and gave us some good looks. Quebracho-crested Tinamou. This was found at the Enciso National Park where we were. Tinamous, again, are rat-tights. They're an ancient lineage of birds. They're, are very limited in their ability to fly. Very difficult to find, but we had some good looks of these birds scurrying across the ground near our lodging at the national park. And so the sixth bird, spot-winged falconet, you can probably tell by how good this photo is that it's not mine, and that means we missed it. We got 5 of the 6, which anyone should be proud of. But we were not lucky with the falconet, this little teeny guy. The black-bodied woodpecker was new for me, so I was fortunate enough to personally clean up all 6 with the woodpecker. But we did well. We got a lot of the exciting birds that we were looking for in this region. The Chaco is fantastic, not only for its special avifauna, but for its mammals and other wildlife. Capybara, the largest mammal on the planet, we had some of those. You can see in the bottom right, there's a juvenile wattled jacana, a type of shorebird that was pretty common in this area. We had a nice boa constrictor, maybe 5 or 6 feet long, across the road when we were doing some afternoon searching. A Yacaré caiman, a type of, crocodilian of sorts that's common throughout Paraguay. Rococo toad, we had this at our hotel in the central Chaco near all the lagoons, bouncing around on our way to dinner. This is large. You might not be able to tell from the photo. That's a big toad. And while we were not fortunate enough to see any peccary, which is what you're looking at here, a type of peccary, out in the wild, we did go to a peccary breeding and research location to see the 3 types of peccaries that they have in Paraguay. So there's collared peccaries and white-lip peccaries, and then the Chaco peccary. And the Chaco peccary was thought to be extinct until the 1970s. And some researchers were down in the area, or at least thought to be extinct by the wider scientific community. The local Guarani and the local Paraguayans knew that they existed, because the researchers that were down trying to do some inventories of the area found the jaw and other bones of a peccary at different meat stands and in different local village shopping areas. And they could tell from the bone structure that it was this long forgotten or what was thought to be a long lost species. And the locals in the area were able to show them that these Chaco peccaries were still around. So we went to this place to see Chaco peccaries, to see some of the captive breeding that's going on and how they're trying to support this population down in Paraguay. And so that was our first portion of the trip up in the Chaco. Again, lots of wetland birds, the Chaco Big 6, which we got 5 of, the Greater Rhea, the ostrich-like bird, and some mammals and exciting stuff. So dry and maybe not the best of roads, but we had a great time and got a lot of our target birds in that part of the country. And the diversity there isn't quite as high, but it allowed us to really get to know the birds that were there. So it was a lot of fun. And this area also has some of the birds that we're more familiar with from the US, some of the wading birds, great egrets and wood storks and spoonbills, snail kite. So that was a good start to our trip. Here we are crossing the Paraguay River. To the right is the Chaco. On the other side is the eastern part of the country, leading into the Atlantic forest, into the capital, as we started looking for new habitats and new birds. And what we're going to expect in the eastern part of the country, there are lots of wet grasslands and continuous wetland habitat around the river systems that they have in Paraguay. The Cerrado or Cerrado habitat. This is kind of the savannas of the Americas. So if you think the African savanna, the Cerrado or Cerrado in South America is similar. There are various subcategories of the Cerrado depending on how much woody vegetation there is. So this is kind of the Cerrado limpio or a clean Cerrado where it's much more grass dominant. We spent a couple of days there. And then in the far eastern part of the country is the Atlantic forest. This is one of the most imperiled habitats on the planet. Only 3 to 5% of it remains. It's rapidly being turned into soy and canola and other agricultural areas. And we spent a few days checking out this fantastic, just really, really dense with birds. We spent a good chunk of time in this habitat. So this is kind of some of the sites that we had. The Arroyos y Esteros was our first kind of wet grassland spot. You can see this area has some sugar cane, which is being harvested on the back of that truck. And then the Cerrado there to the right. When we visited, it happened to be a period of drought and it was really warm. The area is much browner than normal. And there were a lot of fires in the area. Some of them were wildfires. Others were smaller, almost like prescribed burns by the landowner in an attempt to make it so their plot of land would not catch into a larger fire and be more dangerous to their homes and whatnot. So It was a bit smoky, not the ideal landscape we were looking for when we were there, but the birding ended up being good, and it was a great way to learn more about the local culture and how they deal with periods of drought like this. And so some of the birds that we saw at the arroyos, the esteros, the wetland area, we had a white-headed marsh tyrant, which is there to the left. That's a female or a young bird. The males are a jet black with a pure white head. Really striking bird that we saw, but did not pose for a good photo for me. We have that long-tailed reed finch there in the bottom right. It was another little bird that we saw in this area. We had lots of limpkin. If you've ever seen a limpkin down in Florida, or been lucky enough to chase some that show up here in Georgia. And this area also had some really cool tyrant, strange-tailed tyrant, and other cool birds that I was not fortunate enough to get a photo of, that I should have thrown in here because they're just breathtaking and were our main target at this area, strange-tailed tyrant. We had a great pampa finch. We had a few of these popping up, again, low in the wet grasslands. Really pretty kind of olivey green on the back, and a nice contrast of that orange beak with the gray face. Lesser yellow-headed vulture, definitely one of the most handsome vultures that I've ever seen. If you get a good look, and it shows you that rainbow on its face, which is quite amazing. And here's where we were in the Cerrado. So we got access to a parcel of private property. On the left, you can see the scanning video over the grasslands. To the right is a eucalyptus farm, or where they were doing some forestry on the property. Not the best birding, not a native plant at all. But we did find some birds there, and it is something that the locals are dealing with when trying to find income. So balancing the local habitat versus some of these income opportunities. So here are some of the birds that we had in the Cerrado habitat. White-rumped tanager, excuse me, is a really handsome bird in this area. This bird always interested me as a US birder. This is the white-banded tanager, or the shrike-like tanager. If you've ever seen a loggerhead shrike or a northern shrike, this bird would pass off, you know, as something very similar. So it's an interesting, maybe example of convergent evolution, or something's going on that this bird looks almost identical to a shrike, despite not being closely related at all. White-rumped monjita. We had 3 different types of monjita on our trip, but this is one, white-rumped. Strange-tailed tyrant, type of flycatcher. We had multiple family groups that were flying by when we were birding on the side of the road, and flying overhead back and forth and doing that amazing little display. So they were a real stunner. Sharp-tailed tyrant. Now this bird is, I should have mentioned this for the black-bodied woodpeckers and a few of the others. This is a endangered species, or vulnerable, I guess. We saw quite a few endangered and vulnerable species on this trip. And this was one. We had to walk out in the grass for quite a bit. It was warm and windy, but this handsome guy stood up for us and gave everyone great looks. So sharp-tailed tyrant, one of the threatened birds that we saw in the Cerrado. And then one of the top birds of the trip, without a doubt, is this white-winged nightjar. So white-winged nightjars are only known from maybe 5 or 6 breeding locations, most of those in Paraguay. It's a critically endangered species. The males make little to no vocalization, so they're almost a completely silent bird that does make some noise with their wings. And we had had a long, hot day, and we were out in the grassland, and it was hard to walk around. And we were looking for this bird, and we're striking out. It was not going as planned. And then right before it got too dark, we were lucky to find this female, and she allowed us to get pretty close, and we saw her roosting, or resting, excuse me, on this termite mound. So this is a bird that's numbers are, you know, in the low thousands at the highest. It's a very, very difficult, very endangered bird that we were lucky enough to spend a few minutes with before letting her go on her way and get back to her normal life. So this was the top bird in the Cerrado that we were able to spot on our trip. So while we were in the Cerrado and experiencing, you know, really hot weather and dry conditions, ironically, just a couple hundred miles to the east, we were hearing of all this rain. And we were supposed to go to Embericayu, which I mentioned earlier, and it's that Atlantic forest. It's green, it's lush, lots of red clay like we have here in Georgia. The problem is the road leading into Embericayu is long and muddy, and when it rains, some pretty rough things can happen. So here's where it is. in relation to the rest of the geography of the country. So again, we went up to the northwest, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, came back down. 7 and 8 is where we spent those days in the Cerrado and the wet grasslands. And then 9, 10, 11 in Baracayou is where we're supposed to head. But this is what that road looks like after a heavy rain. And we were not going to try to do that. We were in multiple small 4x4 vehicles, but it's just too much of a risk to get stuck in that mud. And I did not want to set us back at all and have us deal with this in any way. So we quickly kind of shifted our plan around. And instead of stopping here, we rushed all the way to the far. I apologize if that was loud on your end. To the Salto de Monde, which is one of the largest, or I think the largest waterfall in Paraguay. So this is far eastern Paraguay, near the border with Argentina and Brazil. Near the Ciudad de Este is the city there. And it's right where those three countries come together. And it was a beautiful waterfall that we got to see. Had a nice sunset there. You can see the top of the fall, the river below, and then kind of the outskirts of Ciudad del Este from the top of the falls. And the birding here was spectacular. We mainly came just to take in the landscape. But we did get a really special bird called a great dusky swift. This bird is specialized on forested habitats that are near waterfalls primarily. And you'll see that these birds, when they come to breed and roost at night, they actually go into the waterfall and cling on to the backside. So here's another video with some sound. Hopefully you can make out all those light gray heads on darker gray bodies as they're coming to spend the night behind the waterfall. So it's an incredibly safe place for these birds to go because very few predators are able to get out there and get to them. But they need to overcome, being wet and getting warm and, all the other difficulties of a life behind a waterfall. But this is a really special bird and you have to go to known locations to really find it at these waterfalls. And we had hundreds of them flying over. So after rushing over to the east and spending that afternoon, it was a long day of driving to get to this part of the country. We did a day trip over to Argentina. And in this photo, we are standing in Paraguay. And to the right, that landmass is Argentina. And to the left, that's Brazil. So this is where the Iguazu River comes and meets with the Paraná. I might be mistaken on the second river, but the two rivers are converging here in the three countries. And we took a ferry across to get into Argentina to go see the Iguazu waterfalls. So as any good birders, we were birding from the boat. We had white-winged swallow and gray-breasted martin. If any of you out there are e-birders, another thing we could do is do multiple e-bird checklists from each country so we could see and record the birds we had in Paraguay. We could see and record the birds we had in Argentina. And even though we never set foot in Brazil, we could record a checklist of the Brazilian birds that we had from the boat as well. So it was, as you can tell, a perfect day to ferry over and enjoy Argentina. But as I mentioned, we went to Iguazu. This is one of the wonders of the world, huge waterfall system, right where Brazil and Argentina come together. You will see some of the swifts coming up from left to right here in a moment. There's a nice big flock of them. So they are here as well. And this is the Devil's Throat, as they call it, the main dense area of the falls. The falls themselves stretch over a mile wide. And this is quote unquote the dry season when we were there. If you come at different times of the year, the falls are even more expansive and just the amount of water that's rushing over them is massive. I can't remember how many more times water it is than Niagara, but it's multiple times as much water passing over these falls. And so here's the entrance. It's a relatively busy place. We were able to get there early to try to beat some of the crowds to get in some of the good birding. There's a beautiful trail network that runs over the Iguazu River and other waterways as you're walking out to the main falls. Here's a few of the views of again, the Devil's Throat and some of the smaller or other falls that are on the edge of the habitat. As always, we were there for birds, but we got some herping in, saw some cool turtles and other animals that we were sharing the space with. But again, the birds and the waterfalls were the top targets. So here you're looking at a plush-crested jay in the top left, a social flycatcher in the top right, which is a pretty common bird throughout Latin America. Rufous-collared sparrow in the bottom right. That is the cousin of our white-crowned and white-throated sparrow here in the US. And then a chestnut-bellied euphonia is the bird there, down there in the bottom left. We also had great looks at a Toco toucan, toucan Sam right here. And one of the people in our group found this amazing blonde-crested woodpecker that was excavating a nest cavity no more than a couple feet off the trail. So we sat there for quite a while and watched, and many people just passed on by, not even realizing what was going on, but it also gave us a chance to kind of educate others about this really sharp-looking woodpecker. So after, pulling people away from the falls, it's hard to leave something so spectacular. We headed by a nearby garden that's kind of geared for hummingbirds. So it's the hummingbird garden, more or less, and it's right in the town of Iguazu in Argentina. And we had great birds. We had some non-hummingbirds. We had this ruby-crowned tanager. This is a female. It obviously has no ruby crown to it. A shiny cowbird, a pretty shiny blackbird, excuse me, or a shiny cowbird, sorry. A bird that we saw throughout the country as we traveled about. A Sayaka tanager. If you've been to Central America, you've maybe seen a blue-gray tanager. This bird is very similar, but only found in southern South America. A common bird that you kind of get used to seeing so much, it loses its luster until you look back at photos like this and realize how stunning they are. This is a blue Dacnus. It's actually a female with all that green coloration. She's pretty showy. The males are more blue all over. They're both spectacular. An anaquit, another common bird throughout Latin America. You can get from the Caribbean all the way down to southern South America. And every once in a while, one of these will show up in Florida. Green-headed tanager, one of my all-time favorite birds. As you can see, there are bananas and other food options for the non-hummingbirds to come and see. But the hummingbirds are why we were here. And you can just see and hopefully hear the magnitude of hummingbirds coming to all these feeders. You might also hear a house wren, a very familiar sound in the background. There's the house wren, but just loads and loads and loads of hummingbirds of somewhere around 8 or 10 different species. And this all just kind of originated from someone's backyard, and now it's open to the public. So some of the birds we saw from the hummingbird perspective, we had the versicolored emerald, black Jacobin. We had a white-throated hummingbird. You can see that white throat right there. And one of my favorites, the black-throated mango. So again, we had, I think, 10 or so species at this location. Those are just 4 that I was able to get decent photos of. And that was our day in Argentina. We had the wonderful boat trip. We got to see the falls, pick up some of those hummingbirds, and just get a sampling of what's possible there. Now, this is where we really had to start changing the itinerary around since our Atlantic Forest site was no longer an option. And so we went down to the town of Encarnacion in southeastern Paraguay, and we were able to visit the Trinidad Jesuit ruins, which is what you see here. And these go back to the 17th century. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it's some of the most impressive Jesuit work around anywhere, or especially that's still standing. So we were able to walk around here and take in some of this amazing place. It was a nice break, I think, for some people to do something not bird related, even though of course we did have birds there. We had southern lapwing, which is the top left, kind of like a killdeer, loud, decent sized shorebird of sorts. The Campo flicker in the top right, not too different from our northern flicker, at least in structure and behavior. Picazuru pigeon in the bottom left, and then burrowing owl, the same burrowing owl that we have in the US down in the bottom right. So after visiting the ruins and leaving the Encarnacion area, we stayed at 2 different areas to get a taste of this Atlantic Forest habitat. One was Hotel Tirol to the left there, and one is the San Rafael National Park to the right. To the right, you can see that was our outdoor dining area, which was not too shabby at all to enjoy some post-birding lunch or dinner. And in this area, we had a few bodies of water, more formal lakes compared to what we had in the Chaco, really dense, jungly rainforest type trails and habitat. And then there were some more open, edgy areas, some cleared fields that were reverting back to a more wild setting. So these were some of the spots that we visited in and around San Rafael and Hotel Tirol. And what about the birds? Pale-breasted thrush coming and eating a papaya. You can see the little bit of papaya down below it. This was a bird that we encountered all over the eastern part of the country. a cattle tyrant. These birds are often, you know, as their name might suggest, near livestock or other human development. Smooth-billed ani, another bird that's relatively common throughout the tropics. There's also groove-billed ani, but this is a smooth-billed. You can kind of see from the upper mandible, the upper part of the beak. Yellow chevron parakeet. You can't see the yellow on the wing there, but I always like this photo, the way it's kind of peeking down at us. Little teeny small parrot that we had. Lots and lots and lots of small yellowy olive flycatchers. And if you're in the tropics or even not, here in Georgia, you get all those Empidonax flycatchers. Down in the tropics, there's many, many more if you ever look at a field guide of this area. Here we have a yellow olive flycatcher in the top left, a southern bristled tyrannulet in the top right, and then a gray Elena down in the bottom middle. So lots of these little birds that all kind of blend together. Ferruginous pygmy owl is a pretty common small owl there, and it's diurnal. It's out a lot during the day. So, you know, sometimes people use playback or they might pish when they're looking for birds. In this part of the world, if you just kind of imitate that clear whistle, oftentimes birds will just show up to come investigate. And oftentimes you'll even pull in an owl, which is what happened here. We were, I think, doing some playback of that owl call to see what birds were around. And this guy came in and started calling back. Lineated woodpecker, we found a nesting pair. This was first reported by some of the people at the farm as a different, much rarer helmeted woodpecker, so we went to go check it out. And while it wasn't the rare bird, it did give us quite an up-close and personal view of the pair nesting. This is actually the male from that red mustache. Spot-billed toucanet, obviously a relative of the toucans in the toucan family. Swallow-tailed or blue manakin. Manakins, you've probably seen videos of them doing like moon dances or very elaborate duets. Their courtship behavior is pretty spectacular, where they'll jump over the female, and the female's normally much more subdued in color or greenish, and the males do an amazing display dance in a lek. So in kind of maybe an open area of the forest where the beam of light is shining through, and they put on quite a show. So something to entertain you on YouTube if you're stuck inside looking for more bird content. Surukua trogon. So trogons are another grouping of birds that spread throughout the tropics. This one is special to the southern cone of South America, the bottom of South America. Now, one story I like to share of things not going as planned but working out okay is our interaction with this big bull, these cows that we had. It was our last full morning at San Rafael, the national park, and on the edge of the park is some agriculture. There are some canola fields. They do have cows, the Swedish family who owns this area. And so we were walking out to have our last hike on our last full morning. And this guy was there, and he would not let us pass. He was right behind a cattle guard, luckily. And he was snotty and huffing and puffing and dragging his hoof. And so we smartly decided to go walk somewhere else. And as we're looping around this area to try to get beyond where that cow was to look for some birds, we were distracted by a couple blackish rails. And so we, we're looking at the birds, so excited to get good looks at rails, and there were babies, and everything was great. And then all of a sudden, after a couple minutes, this bull comes trotting at us rather quickly and rather angrily. And so we're trying to get everyone back behind the fence into safety. And someone tripped and fell. And as we were trying to, pick them up and get to safety, I, as our guide, of course, was starting to panic as this bull was getting very close. And I grabbed the cane of the person who fell down and stood in front of him and reared back and was ready to try my best to hit this bull in the face and do what I could to take the blow if it was going to hit anybody. I didn't want it to be one of our travelers. And luckily enough, the animal stopped right about here and just stared at me and stared at us. And we were able to slowly walk back behind the fence safely and continue our birding. So as someone leading their first international trip for their employer, this was a scary moment, but everything worked out fine. And now it's a great story that I can share. But I'll never forget my encounter with this, with these cows and this bull. One final birding highlight we had at San Rafael after the cow incident was this saffron-cowled blackbird. This is another critically endangered bird that is really disappearing fast. We were lucky enough to see a handful of them on the outskirts of San Rafael and the more open habitats surrounding the Atlantic rainforest. But a bird that's really experiencing some sharp declines, and hopefully there can be some conservation effort to help this bird in the future. On our drive back from the southeastern portion of the country back up to Asuncion, we stopped to get some food items that we'd been talking about, and we did stop at this one town square to look for the black and gold or southern black howler monkey. You can see the two color variations they have there, and then we were lucky enough to see a little baby monkey there in the middle. So this particular type of monkey is difficult to find in Paraguay, but in this particular town square, they hang out and are very obvious in this urban park. So they put on a good demonstration for us. And so when we're all said and done, we had 320 species of birds on our 2-week trip, including 11 that are near threatened, vulnerable, or endangered. We had common stuff like the grayish saltator, white-tipped dove. This is a savanna hawk that was common in the Chaco, a firewood gatherer, what a great name, barred antshrike male, saffron finch from the color there, a whistling heron, one of my favorite herons. Blue-crowned parakeet was the bird that we came across. And this cream-backed woodpecker, which I just love the way this photo turned out, where it looks like it's a little cartoon head sitting on a branch. So, I mean, we just had so many exciting birds. And if you haven't been to Southern South America or to Paraguay, the bird life there is very different than Northern South America or anywhere in the Americas. So I think for the vast majority of the people on the trip, they had 250 or 300 birds that were new to their personal life list. So it was fantastic. Another cool thing I want to talk about, besides just the birding that we did, with this being with Atlanta Audubon being a conservation and education organization, we wanted to help local Paraguayans when we could. And one way that we did this was through the Birders Exchange. This is a program that is or was associated with the American Birding Association. I'm not sure where it sits currently, but we were able to make donations of, Atlanta Audubon made a financial contribution, but we also distributed binoculars, cameras, and field guides to a couple different groups. So Procasara, which is in the top left, those people are working to protect the San Rafael National Park from squatting, from habitat destruction, from people coming in. Even though it's a national park, the oversight there is minimal. So these are guards that are working hard to protect that forest. And some of them don't have optics to look at birds or to look for people, for anything. So we were able to donate binoculars. The bottom left are a couple locally trained birding guides and drivers that we were able to give optics. And then on the right there, this is Para La Tierra. Para La Tierra is an education and conservation organization located in Pilar, and they're doing all sorts of great community outreach, youth education. They're working with American universities. They have an internship program bringing people from primarily the US and Europe to come and do scientific research down in the area as well. So we were fortunate enough to give them some binoculars and a small financial contribution. So it was really exciting to be able to help out some of the people that are doing on the ground work in Paraguay. And birders and birding and the use of eBird down there has just skyrocketed in the past couple of years. So it's really exciting to see the momentum that's building down in South America and specifically in Paraguay. And I always need to give a shout out to the people who come on these trips with me. They've all made it so easy to guide and to spend time with. I mean, this was a long trip. It was 2 weeks, so we really got to know one another and had to stay in close quarters. We had car issues near the end in the top left there that we were able to get through. We had some great dinners and time outdoors, talking over meals. Or in the bottom there, you can see Stephen drinking some yerba mate or tereré, which is a local beverage that every Paraguayan drinks all the time. So it was cool to drink some of that. Our buddy Max on the top right, peeking over a fence, looking at a soccer game while we enjoyed some ice cream. So it was just a fantastic group of people to travel with and to share Paraguay with. We had lots of great evenings, having some beer or red wine as we did our nightly checklist. We convinced everyone to go look under a bridge on the Chaco Highway for a roost of bats, which was really neat to see the bats up in that little crack in the road. On the far right is called chipa. That's a food item in Paraguay that is all over the eastern part of the country. It's kind of like a cornbready biscuit type cheesy bread item, and it's eaten all the time. That was some yerba mate or some sweet coffee, very common to find in that part of the world. And this is just the Paraguayan flag. It's a special place to me. I hope for the people who came with me They had a fantastic time. And I definitely encourage you to think about that. Atlanta Audubon does not have any scheduled trips back to Paraguay, but if you're looking for a safe yet, you know, off the beaten path destination with great birding and traditional culture still in place, I encourage you to give it a look, and I'm always here to answer your questions. So that's more or less the end of my Paraguay part, but right now I know we're all staying at home, we're staying safe, but hopefully there's, you know, light at the end of the tunnel not too far away, and I think many people, at least I'm going to be very eager to get on the road again and start chasing exciting birds. So if you want to learn more about the trip options that Atlanta Audubon has, you can go to our website. You can see it's atlantaaudubon.org/travel, and you can see some of our upcoming trips. And, you know, the Paraguay was our first international trip in many years, the first I had led, and now it's become an annual thing. We did a trip to Costa Rica earlier this year. You can see that fiery throated hummingbird on the top. That was a photo we took on that trip. The horned guan in the middle was from our Guatemala trip 2 years ago. Evening grosbeak on the bottom right was from Michigan, a northern Michigan trip last year. All of our trips that I can think of, all of our big trips from this year have been postponed, but next year we are going to have a bunch of offerings for you all. Multiple domestic trips, multiple international trips. You know, we already have some that are scheduled to Maine, North Dakota, northern Minnesota. But for the next international trip, if you're interested in that and you would like to join me, we're going to go down where this red-headed tanager is, which is in Oaxaca, Mexico. In case you didn't know how to pronounce Oaxaca, now you do. Maybe you've seen it written out. Oaxaca, Mexico is obviously in the southern part of Mexico, southwest. It is the most bird-rich state in all of Mexico. So somewhere around 800 species almost have been found in just the state of Oaxaca itself. It has regional endemics and even a couple endemics that are only found in the state of Oaxaca, which is just so impressive. If you know anything about this area, it has a very rich cultural and archaeological heritage. You know, a beautiful kind of colonial historic downtown. And the food there, the mole, the mezcal, it's a definite culinary destination. It's a really interesting place. And the birds are amazing. So the first half of the trip, we will be near Oaxaca City, which is kind of in a slightly higher elevation. We'll look for slaty vireo on the right and the red warbler there on the left. Can't wait to give chase to those. We'll visit Monte Alban, which is one of those, archaeological sites right outside of the capital, Oaxaca, the city. Then we're going to head down to the coast where it's obviously lower elevation, much warmer. We're going to look for orange-breasted bunting. We're going to do a pelagic trip to look for shearwaters and petrels and other ocean birds that are almost impossible to find from land. And so if you are starting to think about post-COVID travel and what that might look like, I encourage you to reach out. This trip is scheduled for March of next year. Currently, it's still a go, and we'll continue to evaluate as things change or more information comes about. We will be partnering with Mexico Birding Tours, specifically Eric Antonio Martinez, who's one of, if not the top bird guides in Oaxaca and in that part of Mexico. Currently, there's one spot remaining. Now, if you're a couple and you're considering this trip, please do reach out, because who knows how people are going to think about traveling in the future. But we will have safe procedures in place, and this is going to be an exciting time, an amazing week to look at birds in this part of Mexico. And with that in mind, I just want to thank everyone. I hope you enjoyed escaping to Paraguay a bit. My email's there if you have any questions about Paraguay, about the birds you saw here, about future Audubon trips, domestic, international, or even in the region. Our Bird Fest has been postponed to this fall, so it's only a couple of months away now. We'll have all sorts of safe, small trips that everyone can join us on and learn about the birds of Georgia. And again, I thank you, and I will take any questions and hope to see you on a future Atlanta Audubon trip. Got a comment from Kim saying she had a good time. Thank you, Kim. I'm glad that you're getting into the birding world. It seems like a lot of people during this quarantine are finding an escape through birds and finding a way to safely get out and look for them. And we are happy to be a resource here. And one thing I failed to mention is we are going to continue to just put out this virtual content as we start figuring out, what our bird walks will be like or what life is going to be like moving forward. So please do check out our digital resources page. Keep an eye on our Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, everything for other webinars, other travel. I know I'm doing a travel-based webinar on Michigan later this month. So yeah, just keep tuning in, and hopefully we can help you learn more about birds and enjoy your time in quarantine as much as possible. All right, thank you all again, and we will talk to you next time.